This blanket design is called Forrest and it is my take on a festive blanket. As usual, I didn't want to just do what everybody else is doing, so I've gone for something that is more subtly leaned towards a festive blanket rather than being something that just screams Christmas when you look at it. I didn't want this blanket to be something that only somebody who is looking very specifically for a Christmas knit would tackle. I wanted it to be something that anybody would feel comfortable knitting, but those who are looking for something around the festive period to knit would look at it and think, yeah, that's a Christmas blanket, but I just didn't want it to be overly in your face Christmassy. Forrest is a longer repeat than normal. It's a 30 row repeat and the pattern multiple across your rows is also longer at 18. This means that there is a little bit more counting involved than with some of my other blankets, but I'm going to walk you through all those rows and that pattern multiple. So as long as you can count up to 18 and up to 30, then you should be good to go. To knit a blanket like mine, you are going to need 400 grams of double knit yarn. I've used King Cole Cherished in the shade Fern, but I think any shade of yarn would work really well for this blanket. You are also going to need some circular knitting needles. You want them to be 4mm in diameter and at least 80 centimeters in length. Otherwise, if you're using shorter needles, they will not accommodate the number of stitches that you need to cast on. You are also going to need embroidery scissors and tapestry needles to sort out your ends when you change your yarn ball. And then last but not least, you are going to need 2 stitch markers, and we use these to separate out the side border from that middle textured panel. Normally, when I give you the pattern multiple for my blankets, I give you the pattern multiple for the textured panel first and then tell you to cast on an additional 18 stitches for your side borders. That's 9 for each side. Now, because the pattern multiple for Forrest is 18 plus 10, it doesn't make sense to give you those side border stitches separately because they are the same number as that main pattern repeat. So when you are casting on your blanket, you want to first cast on a number that is a multiple of 18. Once you've done that, you are going to add 10 stitches on. For Forrest, is 65 centimeters wide. You are going to want to cast on 136 stitches. If you want a blanket that is bigger or smaller, you're going to need to adjust your cast on using that pattern multiple. For this video, I am just going to cast on a very small sample, but again, if you want to replicate exactly the same size blanket that I have made, you're going to want to cast on 136 stitches. You will always find me using the long tail cast on for my blankets. It's just the method that I prefer, but if you have a method that you prefer, then please feel free to use that one instead. The pattern will still work. This blanket is knitted all in one piece from bottom up to top. So the first part of the blanket that we need to tackle is that bottom garter stitch border. Now this consists of 15 rows worked in exactly the same way. I'm going to walk you through how to knit row 1 and then I'm going to leave you to carry on and work rows 2 to 15 yourself. As our border is knit in garter stitch, it is really easy to work. Everything with the exception of this final stitch is a knit stitch. This final stitch here is something called a selvage stitch, and we work this in a slightly different way so that we get a really nice neat side edge up the long edges of our blanket. The method that I'm going to show you gives a nice braided effect up the side edges of your blanket, and it just gives it a little bit more of a sharper look than if you just knit garter stitch all the way across your rows. So you are going to start the first row of your blanket by knitting all the way along your row until you get to that very last stitch. This final stitch, the selvage stitch in our row, we are going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front. So first things first with this technique, you are going to want to pop your working yarn to the front of your work. As I knit continental knitting, I just pick up the working yarn and hold it in place with that right hand needle. But if you prefer to lift your working yarn to the front of your work, you feel free to do that. It makes no difference. So once your working yarn is to the front of your work, you are going to get this right hand needle here and you're going to slip it into that final stitch from right through to left. So just straight in as if you're going to purl. You don't want to go in from left to right because you will twist the stitch and we don't want to do that at this point. So you're going to pop your right hand needle into that stitch from right through to left, and once it's firmly on your right hand needle, you can remove your left hand needle And then the last thing to do, if you haven't already, is to make sure that this working yarn is all the way to the front of your work, because if you don't do that and you turn your work and start knitting, you'll probably accidentally create an extra stitch. So that's row 1 of 15 done. You now need to go and work rows 2 to 15 in exactly the same way, and then I will rejoin you to show you how we tackle the middle textured panel that forms the bulk of our blanket. Now that our border is done, we are ready to jump into the 30 row repeat that's going to form the bulk of our blanket. Now, the first time that we work row 1, we're going to do a little bit of setup work to get our stitch markers in place, but every subsequent time that you work row 1, you are just going to slip your markers instead of placing them. In this blanket, all our odd numbered rows form the right side of our work. All that means is when you are working an odd numbered row, you will have the right side of your work facing you. To start row 1, you want to knit 9 stitches. Then you're going to grab the first of your 2 stitch markers and just pop it onto your right hand needle. Next, you want to knit your way across your row until 9 stitches before the end of the row. That will be when you have 9 stitches left to work on this left hand needle. When you reach that point, you are going to grab the second of your 2 stitch markers and again just pop it onto your right hand needle. Now you're going to carry on and knit the next 8 stitches, and that should just leave you with 1 stitch left in the row. And just like with our bottom garter stitch border, this is our selvage stitch and it's worked in exactly the same way as we did for the border, so you are going to slip that stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 2 starts by knitting 9 stitches, and this is a good point to check that your stitch marker is in the right place, because after your 9th stitch you should hit your stitch marker to slip it over. Slip the marker over, and now you are going to purl all the stitches between the 2 markers. So just work your way along your row, purling your stitches until you hit that second marker. When you reach your second marker, you are going to slip it over from one needle to the other, and then you're going to carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. Finish your row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. For row 3, you are just going to knit your way across your row. You are going to slip your stitch markers from one needle to the next as you come to them, and then when you get to that very last stitch of the row, you're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 4 by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip that first stitch marker over, and then you want to purl the next 4 stitches. Next, you want to knit the next 2 stitches, and now you're going to jump into a 9 stitch repeat that you're going to work across your row until 4 stitches before your second marker, and those 9 stitches goes as follows. You are going to purl 7 stitches, and then knit 2 stitches. And you're going to repeat that purl 7 knit 2 combination until 4 stitches before your second marker, and that should come after you have worked a knit 2. These 4 stitches before that second marker you are going to purl. Slip the marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. Then to finish your row, you're going to slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Rows 5, 6 and 7 are a carbon copy of rows 1, 2 and 3. So for row 5, you are going to knit all the way across and then slip that final stitch purlwise. For row 6, you are going to knit until the first marker, purl the stitches between the 2 markers, and then knit 8 and then slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. And for row 7, you are going to knit all the way across and slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Because this is such a long repeat at 30 rows, I don't want to keep bombarding you with these same 3 stockinette rows because we work those in between each little textured row that we work that builds our trees. If you need a recap, you can just rewind the video a little bit and go and watch rows 1, 2 and 3 again. But if you go away and work rows 5, 6 and 7, I will come back and join you at the beginning of row 8 to talk you through our next texture row. Row 8 is another row that adds texture, and you're going to start by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip the stitch marker over from your left needle to your right needle, and then you are going to purl 2 stitches. Next you are going to knit 6 stitches. And now you are going to jump into an 18 stitch repeat that you're going to work along your row until 2 stitches before your second marker. Even though it's 18 stitches long, it isn't that complicated to get to grips with. So to start that repeat, you are going to purl 2, then you're going to knit 8, then you're going to purl 2 again, and then you are going to knit 6. And you repeat that combination all the way along your row until 2 stitches before that second marker, and you should come to that point after a knit 6. So just to recap, that is purl 2, knit 8, purl 2, knit 6, all the way until 2 stitches before your second marker. The final 2 stitches before that second marker you are going to purl. Then you want to slip that marker over from one needle to the next and carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. That should leave you with just one last stitch, and you're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Once again, rows 9, 10 and 11 are a repeat of rows 1, 2 and 3. So if you go ahead and work those 3 rows, I will rejoin you for row 12, our next textured row. Row 12 starts by knitting the 9 stitches that take you to your first stitch marker. Slip that stitch marker over when you get to it, and then you are going to purl the next 3 stitches. After that you are going to knit 4 stitches, and now we're going to jump into an 18 stitch repeat that you are going to work all the way along your row until 3 stitches before your second marker, and that repeat goes as follows. You are going to purl 4, knit 6, purl 4 again, and then knit 4. And you're going to repeat that combination of purl 4, knit 6, purl 4 and knit 4 all the way along until 3 stitches before your second marker, and if you count your stitches correctly you should get to that point after you have finished a repeat, so after you've worked a knit 4. These 3 stitches before your second marker you just want to purl. Slip your marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. And then finish off your row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Once again, the next 3 rows, so rows 13, 14 and 15 are a repeat of rows 1, 2 and 3, and they build those little stockinette gaps. So if you go away and work the next 3 rows yourself, I will do the same, and then we will tackle row 16 together. For row 16 you are going to start by knitting each stitch until you hit your first stitch marker. Slip the marker over, and then you are going to purl the next 4 stitches. Next you are going to knit 2 stitches, and now once again you are going to jump into an 18 stitch repeat that you are going to repeat all the way along your row until 4 stitches before your second marker, and that repeat goes as follows. You are going to purl 6, knit 4, purl 6 again, and then knit 2. And you're going to repeat that combination of purl 6, knit 4, purl 6, knit 2 until 4 stitches before your second marker, and if you count your stitches correctly you should hit that point after you finish a repeat, so after a set of knit 2. For the 4 stitches before your second marker you want to purl those stitches. Slip that marker over and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. Finish off by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Once again I'm going to leave you to work the next 3 rows yourself, and as before they are a repeat of rows 1, 2 and 3, so you now need to go away and work rows 17, 18 and 19 in the same way that you worked rows 1 to 3, and then I'll come back and show you how we work row 20, that is the last textured row that we need to work. Row 20 as always starts by knitting the first 9 stitches. Slip the marker over when you get to it, and now you are going to purl the next 13 stitches. Then you are going to knit 2 stitches, and now you're going to jump into an 18 stitch repeat that you're going to repeat until 13 stitches before your second marker. That repeat goes as follows. You are going to purl 16, and then once you've purled 16 stitches you are going to knit 2, and you're going to repeat that combination of purl 16, knit 2 all the way until 13 stitches before the end of your blanket. And in my case, as I'm only working a small sample, I am already 13 stitches before the end of my row, and so I am going to purl those 13 stitches. Slip the marker over and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. Last but not least, you're going to slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 21 is very straightforward. You are going to knit every single stitch with the exception of that final selvage stitch. When you get to your stitch markers, you're going to slip them over from one needle to the next, and then that final selvage stitch of the row you are going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 22 by knitting 9 stitches. That should take you to your first stitch marker, and you're just going to slip that over from your left to your right needle, and now you're going to purl your way across your row until you hit that second marker. Slip your second marker over and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. That leaves you with your selvage stitch, and you're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Rows 23 to 30 form that garter stripe block that separates our little tree panels. So for that reason, rows 23 up to and including row 30 are all worked in the same way. You are going to knit your way across the row, knitting every single stitch with the exception of that final stitch. That final stitch you are going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front, and then when you get to your stitch markers you're going to slip them over from one needle to the next. So you're going to repeat this same row for rows 23 up to and including row 30, and I will rejoin you at the end of row 30 to talk you through how you build the rest of your blanket. These 30 rows form the building blocks of your blanket, and they are the rows that you're going to repeat over and over until your blanket is about 10 centimeters shorter than you want your overall length to be. If you are replicating my blanket, then you're going to need to repeat these rows 8 times, and then once you've done that, so that you get symmetry top and bottom, you want to repeat just rows 1 to 23 once more, and then you're going to move on to the top garter stitch border. So what I'm going to do now is go away and repeat rows 1 to 23 so you can see what I mean about the symmetry, and then we will tackle that top garter stitch border together. Your project will have many more repeats than mine, but you can see that by only repeating 1 to 23 of our repeat rows on the final time that we work them means that when we come to work our top border, we're going to get symmetry, and we're not going to get a top border that is much deeper than our bottom border. Just like with our bottom garter stitch border, the top border consists of 15 rows worked in exactly the same way, and to work those rows you are going to do the following. You are going to knit all the way across until you reach that very final stitch. When you hit your stitch markers on this first row, you can remove them. We don't need to mark our side borders anymore, so there's no need to keep them on our needles. So just take them off as you hit them and pop them to one side. Then you're going to carry on and knit your way all the way across your row. When you get to that very last stitch, just like we have done for the rest of the project, you are just going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. And you are going to repeat that for a total of 15 rows. After working your 15 rows, you should have a border that matches the bottom border. So that means you should have 8 garter ridges of border, just like you have 8 garter ridges at the bottom. Now the final row of this project is the cast off. I'm going to show you how to work the first few stitches, and then I'm going to leave you to carry on by yourself. But if you want a slightly more in-depth video, I do have one that is going through everything in really nice slow steps, and I will link that for you now. But for this video I'm just going to go over the first few and then leave you to it. The cast off I like to work for these blankets is a basic knitted cast off. That's because not only is it easy to work, but it matches the cast on that I use, so it means again the top and bottom look as similar as possible. The basic rule of this cast off is you never have more than 2 stitches on this right hand needle, and you are going to start your cast off by knitting 2 stitches. Try not to knit these too tight because otherwise your cast off edge will pull in and won't lay flat. Once you've got 2 stitches on this right hand needle, you're going to grab your left hand needle and pop it into the first stitch that you worked from left through to right. Then you are going to hold the first of the 2 stitches with your index finger, and you're going to use this left hand needle to lift that stitch up, over and completely off your right hand needle, and you should have gone from 2 stitches on that right hand needle to 1. Then you're going to carry on and knit 1 more stitch, so you go back up to 2 stitches on this right hand needle, and then you're going to repeat the process again. Pop your left hand needle in from left to right, hold that first stitch firmly so it doesn't drop off the needles, and then lift up and over and off your right hand needle to go back down to 1 stitch. You are going to repeat that process of knitting 1 and lifting 1 all the way to the end of your row until you have no stitches left to work on this left hand needle and just this 1 stitch left on your right hand needle. So I will now leave you to carry on with the rest of your cast off, and I will rejoin you when we have just this final stitch on our right hand needle to work. When you're left with just this one stitch on your right hand needle, you can break your yarn. You want to leave yourself a tail that is long enough to sew in your ends, and then just one last step that I do to secure this final stitch nicely is I pull up to make the stitch bigger, and then I take my needle out. We don't need those anymore. Then I put my finger and thumb through this slightly larger loop, grab my tail and pull it all the way through. Then I pull it nice and tight and give it a really good tug to tighten up that last stitch, and then once you sew in your ends you can't see that there was ever an extra loop there. A couple of final bits and bobs before I leave you to your knitting. For those of you wanting a written pattern, there is of course a free version on my blog along with links to buy an ad-free PDF if you prefer to have something to print and take away with you. You can of course knit this blanket in any weight of yarn that you like. You're just going to need to make sure that you pick the right size of needles for the weight of yarn that you choose, and you may need to adjust your cast on and then how many repeats that you work. And last but not least, if festive knitting isn't your thing, or if this video has hit you at the wrong time of year, I'm going to leave you with another blanket of mine that I think you might also enjoy.